Hi, you're listening to Book Chat with author Vivian E. Moore.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
Hello and welcome to Book Chat. I am your host, author Vivian E. Moore. I hope everyone had a great week, and I hope that you are having a even better weekend. I know that this is a shopping weekend because Christmas is next week, and I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, happy holidays, happy Kwanzaa. I hope that this will be your best season ever. All right, so we're going to get straight to today's show. The title is What the, and the topic is creating a manuscript with style and structure. All right, so when writing a manuscript, the magic, it lies in your ideas and how you bring them to life with your words. Okay, so every element it contributes to your stories, right? To the rhythm and the tone and also the clarity, and that extends to punctuation, to parts of speech like the adjectives and the verbs, the nouns, and of course those interjections, right? So I don't know about you, but growing up, I watched Schoolhouse Rock on Saturday mornings, okay? And so that helped to give me the foundation that I needed for proper sentence structure. Okay, long before I even got into school and learned these things as a part of the English language when you're writing it, okay, or when you're speaking it. So today I want to explore to those who, may be confused as to when you use commas and all of those different things, okay? We're going to talk about that. So we're going to use today's episode as a learning tool so that will help you to effectively craft an exciting manuscript, right? Okay, so let's get started with the punctuations, right? So I've always said that punctuations are like the unsung heroes of writing, because it is, all right? Because those punctuation marks, they're small, right? But they are very powerful tools that help you to organize your writing. And it also is a guide for the readers through your thoughts, okay? So let's talk about a few of those key marks that you need to master, right? So of course, first is the period, right? That's one of the first things we learned when developing sentence structure, even when we were little kids in elementary school. We learned that each sentence needed to end with some type of punctuation. All right, because we know that periods, they end a sentence and they end them with authority. Because if you don't have a period at the end of the sentence, well, that means that, they're waiting for you to say something else. But if there's a period there, then that's the mark to end that particular sentence. Okay, I know this sounds elementary, but there are a lot of people who struggle with punctuations, and and maybe not so much the period or the question mark, but most definitely the comma, because most times you don't know exactly where to place that comma. All right, and that's the next thing on the list. So the comma, it creates that natural pause, right? And it also separates those elements. So just an example, okay, she packed a pen, notebook, and her laptop. Okay, so if you didn't have those commas placed in the right position, then that sentence is not going to read well, okay? But when you put those commas in the right place after the pen, after the notebook, then that separates those elements, okay? So now let's talk about the question mark, because we know that question marks adds curiosity, because we all want to know what happens next, right? So so that is the general business of question marks. They add that curiosity. Now, the exclamation mark. The exclamation mark. I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't get my get my words out today. But what they do is they interject that excitement or that urgency. Okay, so they add that element of excitement to every story. It gets you involved and it lets you know that something exciting is about to happen, right? So that is why we use exclamation marks. All right. So now let's talk about the apostrophe. Okay. So we know that apostrophe shows possession or they are forms of contractions, right? So you know that when you're using the apostrophe, it generally comes in conjunctions, right? Or it forms contractions. I'm sorry. It forms contractions, just like the word it or its. Okay, because we know that it's without the apostrophe s. Then we know that that is not forming a contraction if it's it without the apostrophe s. But if it has that apostrophe s, then we know that that is the form of a contraction. All right. So now let's talk about the ellipses. And I know that a lot of publishers, not publishers, but editors do not like to see ellipses in sentences. Okay. They will delete those quick, fast, and in a hurry. But sometimes we need them because they suggest a trailing thought, right? So, just use them sparingly because sometimes they are needed because they add that extra element to a story, and just don't overuse them. And the best way to remember this is to treat it like a seasoning, since we're moving into a holiday, and I know a lot of people will be cooking their Christmas meals. So treat punctuation like you would seasoning, okay? Too little makes your writing bland, and then too much will actually overwhelm the reader. So just remember that, okay? So now let's talk about adjectives. We know that adjectives paint an entire picture in your story. They add that color and that detail to your writing that can transform, just plain sentences into that vivid imagery. And that's what we want to do. Just to give you an example. Okay, so I could write a sentence that goes a little bit like this. The house stood on the hill. Well, that sounds sort of elementary, sort of plain, right? But if we add those adjectives to it, this is how it sounds. The crumbling, ivory-covered house stood on the misty hill. You see how much better that sounds? How much more exciting and colorful that is when you add in those details? All right, that's the way it goes. And when writing a manuscript, those adjectives, they also help to set the scene because they define the characters and then they evoke those emotions, and we definitely want that, okay, in our stories. So, but again, like anything else, like everything else that we talked about, you need to be mindful and try to avoid overloading your sentences with those unnecessary descriptors. Now, I've read plenty of books that, it just wore me out. I was so, by the time I finished reading the book, I was so desensitized because I was oversensitized while I was reading the book. So we don't want that to happen to your readers, okay? So now let's talk about verbs, because we know that verbs drive the action, right? They bring the action. And because verbs are those, they are the engines of your sentences, right? They propel your story forward because they bring that strong and precise verbs that help to keep the readers engaged, okay? So, for instance, just another example. Okay, so I just want to use this sentence. Okay, she went to the door. Okay, so we know how generic and plain that sounds, right? There is nothing exciting about it at all. She just went to the door. That tells me absolutely nothing, okay? But when you use a strong verb like she bolted to the door, well, that brings all the action you need. That lets you know that she got to that door quick, fast, in a hurry. Either she was going out of it or she was excited to see who was coming through it, right? So that is the function of verbs. They bring the action, all right? So, and you always need to use your active voice to make sure that your sentences dynamics are strong instead of weak, okay? So now let's talk about those nouns. We know that nouns are also the building blocks of writing, because we know that nouns, if you watch Schoolhouse Rock on Saturdays, or they describe things, right? They tell you about the people, places, and things, right? So we need those nouns because they populate your story. The ideas in your story. That's what they do. They populate those ideas in your story, and they provide the framework for your manuscript. So you need to make sure that you're always using specific nouns. You know, instead of dog, you need to tell the readers, because they can't visualize it unless you tell them what type of dog it is. So instead of saying, you know, just a dog, make it a golden retriever or whatever type of pet, what type of dog that you prefer. But make sure that you are explaining that to the reader so that way they can visualize it as they're reading it. And you need to use those concrete nouns to engage the readers, okay, to give them something tangible to look forward to. All right, so just remember that. And you can also use those abstract nouns, because what they do is they have to evoke that emotion or set up those concepts like freedom or hope. And Lord knows we need a lot of that today. So just remember that nouns have that balancing effect. That specific and abstract nouns, they help to ground your story, you know, while leaving room for all of the thematic depth. Okay, so now let's move on to interjections. Well, we know that interjections add emotion and personality. Okay, so you know, instead of a bland word, you need to use something that's exciting. So, you know, generally interjections always have some type of exclamation point behind it to let you know that there is emotion and personality behind those words. Okay. So now let's bring it all together. So we know that all of these elements, they work harmoniously. Okay. The punctuation adds the rhythm, the adjectives set the mood, the verbs create the action, and then the nouns establish the settings while the interjections inject emotion. That's their job. Okay. So here are a few tips for you for some writing success. You need to make sure that you have the right balance, and you can read it aloud, read your sentences aloud to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And then you need to edit like it's going out of style. And then also it helps to study the masters, because if you see how they do it, then you cannot go wrong. All right. So overall, you know, mastering punctuation, you know, they are the building blocks of all languages. And when we add in those adjectives, those verbs, those nouns, and those interjections, that will also help to elevate your manuscript from a collection of ideas to a polished piece of art. And that's what we want to do. So what are you waiting for? It's time to start writing. All right, guys. So that is it for today. I hope that it was helpful for you. I hope that you will continue to listen, like, and share. And again, I wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, because we will not have a show next weekend because it is a holiday weekend. All right. So as I say at the ending of every show, always tell those who you care about the most how you feel about them today, because tomorrow is not promised. Today may be the only chance you get to say it. So on that note, I love you. I hope you love me back. Until the next time you hear my voice, God bless you and goodbye.
Loved what you've heard on this week's episode? Well, the answer is simple. It would mean the world to us if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review and feedback. Spreading the word really is the best way to grow our podcast and achieve even greater things. Thank you.